Hi, I'm Nyesha McCauley, and you're watching AccessTV.org.
Good morning and welcome to the challenge. As always, first and foremost, I'd like to thank God for another opportunity and thank you, the viewers, for tuning in. This morning on Grassroots TV, we want to talk about politics. And I've asked my guest, who happens to be the Honorable Thurman Milner, the first African-American mayor of a major city in New England, to come on and talk politics with us. Good morning, Thurman.
Good morning, and it's good to be with you. Haven't been around you in quite a while, Russell. You're looking well. It's a bright and wonderful morning to be out.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for consenting to be my guest. I don't think I could think of anybody else, quite frankly, who would be more appropriate to talk politics with, certainly during this political season, than yourself. I know that you're a seasoned politician, if you will, and have served both at the municipal level and at the state level, and has been a stalwart, if you will, in our community when it comes to understanding and being a part of the political process. Thank you for your years of service.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, well, I want to go right into it. I want to share with the viewers, what it was like for you, if you will, when your dear friend Wilbur Smith, who was serving in the Senate, said to you, Thurman, run.
Yeah.
You need to run for mayor, man. Come on. And, we need to make change happen, and we need to do it now. So what was that like?
It was very interesting because, number one, I never considered myself a politician, and don't even today.
Okay.
What happened, we came out of the civil rights movement, and Wilbur came to me as a young state senator and the young president of the NAACP back in those days, and I had just come back from New York working with Mayor Lindsay in New York, and I was working at CRT. He came to me and said, at that time, why don't you run for state representative?
Oh, wow.
And I looked at him like he was crazy. I said, I'm not interested in running. I'm at CRT. I have a good job now. I'm quite happy being back home. He said, no, we need you. Then after meeting with some other people, I decided I'd run for state rep. And then a few years down, after serving 2 terms as a state rep, he came back to me again. And along with people like Jim Monroe and Curtis Robinson and a few others, and said to me, we think you should run for mayor. Of course, I looked at them as if they were crazy. Wilbur had ran for mayor several years before that time,
Sure.
but he didn't win. And I had never thought about running for mayor. It wasn't something that in my agenda. And secondly, I said, okay, let me take a look at. So I went to talk to people and other groups, and I went to our group, the NAACP president at that time, and he looked at me as if I was crazy. He said, maybe you should run for city council. I don't think you can elect a mayor in Hartford.
Who was the branch president
I
of
don't
the
know who the
NAACP?
branch
Was it
president
Art
was at the
Johnson?
time.
Was Art Johnson the president at the time?
I think so, yeah.
Or Tom? Or
Tom, I think it was
Tom Fuller?
Tom, yeah.
Tom Fuller,
and he said to me, I don't think you should, we can elect a black mayor in Hartford, so you should run for city council.
Okay.
Don't waste the black vote.
Okay.
That, of course, made me decide to run.
And what was the makeup of the city at that particular time?
City was actually, we had a divided city at the time. You had North End, South End. South End was predominantly white, North End predominantly black. You had very few West Indians and very few Puerto Ricans in Hartford at that time. Mm-hmm. The power structure was then called the bishops, who were the heads of the insurance companies. They basically controlled the economics of Hartford at that time. And we had a mayor who had been in for many, many years, George Atherson, who was a good friend of mine. And that's one thing I tell people in politics: you don't run because you don't like someone. You run to make a difference. And at that time, we thought there needed to be a change. Wilbur and I had just come out of the civil rights movement. We were both civil rights activists. And I thought it was an extension of my civil rights. He says, we're fighting for change on this end. We need to get where we can make change. And that was his idea of him running for state senate, and then me running as a state representative, then running for mayor to make some positive changes.
I know most of the civil rights movement was about actually getting us to participate more fully in the process, getting us to actually be at the table, if you will.
Well, that's what it was all about, and that's what my running for election was about. It was not so much of being a politician, was extending my civil rights activism into politics. To make a change, to make a difference for our people.
Was the prevailing thought more or less getting us to the table? It was, us being able to have access to the conversations, if you will, or access to the opportunities.
Well, that's it. For many, many years, we've been told what we should do and how to do it. And we wanted to sit down where we could be able to make decisions for ourselves and for our children, for our families, and for the future. That was very, very important. It's amazing because during the civil rights movement, as you know, the South changed dramatically, much faster than the North did. It became more integrated. We had institutional racism existing here in our great state. Because it's amazing, when I was elected mayor, I was the first elected black mayor in New England, and yet still you had 18 black mayors in Mississippi, about 20 in Georgia, and about 20 in Alabama. And this is New England, a great constitutional state, and I became the first one. So it was not a great victory for me. I felt it was a great honor for my mother, more so for me. But, being the first in New England was sort of a shameful thing in some sense. After the whole struggle we went through, because, they sent us south to fight for equal rights, and yet and still up here, we were way behind as far as our rights were concerned. Wow.
That is a very interesting perspective. I don't think most of the general public really knows that. I think that there is some sort of miseducation, if you will, with respects to, the political landscape. And I think, there's some misgivings about, just how far, we've come.
From where we were,
Where we were,
And actually, my ancestors were slaves in Middletown, Connecticut. So my family's been here since the 1700s. So, everybody thinks slaves are all in the South. But a lot of them are up here in the state. But it was a struggle because looking back now over the years to see how far behind we were in Connecticut as compared to the South, it was amazing. And everybody thought that this was the great.
Oh, absolutely. Everybody wanted to migrate north because they felt like people were a lot more liberal, and liberal somehow become a bad word. I don't know how it became a bad word, but it seems like to me that coming north meant that there were greater opportunities. There was more opportunity for freedom, if you will, and less of the treating of the bad treatment. It was here in the north.
Well, had all the hangings and the lynchings and stuff in the South, but you also had all the black institutions, our black colleges, all in the South. We had no black colleges up in the North. That's why
that's right.
Most of us who grew up and raised up here came from domestic families. We didn't come from college-educated families. Our parents and grandparents were domestics who worked, as servants or cab drivers.
Right. Porters and waiters and those kinds of things. And
it was amazing because when the Southerners first started coming here, it was a big change in the attitudes, looking at us and wondering why we're domestics and because I went to school with the first African American school teacher in Hartford. That was Edith Taylor at Arsenal School. So when I tell kids at the Milner School about these things now, they think I'm 100 years old. But it's really not that long. But it's amazing how far we've come from where we have been. And I think one of the things we don't teach our youngsters, our history and the struggle. They take it for granted, the things that they get today. And the civil rights struggle started all this stuff.
Yeah.
I would not have been elected mayor of the city of Hartford had it not been for the civil rights struggle and those whose shoulders I stood on coming along myself.
Well, that's why we're so glad that you consented to coming this morning. Honestly, the challenge, the challenge is really about addressing the challenges that we face in our community and hopefully, offering some solutions to some of the problems that we have. And I think, you just highlighted it, most of us don't understand our history.
Right.
We don't seem to have an appreciation and don't embrace it in the way that we should. And so, unfortunately, history seems to perpetuate itself, because you're facing some of the same challenges even now that you were that you were dealing with during the civil rights struggle. Would you agree?
Even one thing about it, even our youngsters, when the month they give us is so-called Black History Month, they talk about Sojourner Truth and all these other people, but they don't talk about the struggle that got us here today. They talk about Martin Luther King's dream, but they don't talk about the struggle he was in to make the changes that took place today.
Absolutely.
And all that's sugar-coated. We're actually the struggle and the fighting and the lynching all
the boycotts that took place.
Yeah.
Why he went to those different places to be a part of those boycotts. I'm looking at the TV even today, and there was a young man killed in Ferguson, Missouri, and Al Sharpton shows up, and I think Jamal Bryant, who's a former NAACP, shows up, there in Ferguson, Missouri. And, the reaction from a lot of people is, okay, well, why does Al show up at these places? And I'm sure he's invited. Right. But I think the other thing is because they also bring with it a certain amount of national attention to problems that exist within those particular places. And it's the same kinds of problems that exist even right here now in the Hartford area.
Oh, yeah. Same thing can happen very well here in Hartford,
Right.
I've known Al Sharpton since he was a youngster preaching in New York.
Okay.
When I was in New York working for the Lindsay administration.
Okay.
And he's still fighting in the struggle.
Yes.
Struggle.
Yeah.
And, to see him now still fighting and hanging in there.
Yeah.
I know, that's the kind of thing we need to begin to look back and see how he got to where he is.
It's the activism. The activism that's necessary in order for change to occur.
To occur.
Yeah. So,
and, you still have them instances, when you look at what's happening with our president,
Right.
No one wants to say anything about racism anymore because they want to shovel it under the rug. But it's still alive and real today. But, and it's more subtle, but it's worse that way because, you sort of push it under the rug.
Right.
And when something like what happened out there in California happens, everybody acts like it's something
living in denial of some sort.
Oh
no, it doesn't exist. No, I don't feel that way. And the country isn't like that.
Black community with only 2 black police officers out of 50 or 60. That's itself is amazing.
Yeah, it is really in this day and time. I think that if we can, I'd like to digress a little bit further. We mentioned names of people who were instrumental in your career, like Wilbur Smith. Give me a little snippet about the person Wilbur Smith, who I happen to know is a real grassroots activist.
Oh, yeah.
And was really one of the catalysts for a lot of stuff that took place here in Hartford.
Oh, yeah. Wilbur Smith came to Hartford from the South when he was 17 years old.
Okay.
And I had first met him. He came north mainly because of the problems that were happening in the South, only to find out coming up here he faced some of the same problems.
Right.
And that sort of angered him, but it made him an activist, and he wanted to make some changes and positive changes. And the first group he turned to was the NAACP. He was the youngest president of our branch, the Hartford branch. And then he decided that, he came to talk about making change.
Sure.
He said, instead of fighting institutions, let's join these institutions and fight from within. And he decided to run for state senate as a young senator.
Right.
He ran against a well-known lawyer in Hartford, Attorney Bose Barlow, as you know, and became the youngest African-American and first youngest African-American senator in the entire state. And worked very hard and fought very hard. But he came in there with a civil rights background. So he came in with division and with the attitude
Right.
to fight some of the concerns that he had to make some positive changes, not just with some ideological stuff that he just wanted to become a state senator.
Sure.
As such.
So he had specific goals.
He had goals that he wanted
And
to reach
objectives.
because he's been in the
Right.
battle and he knew what
Right.
the problems were, he knew what the struggles were.
Right.
Then he actually came to me, as I said before, and I sort of laughed it off, but he said he was very seriously wanted, and he came to me and he came to also Carrie Perry. Back in our old civil rights days, we were known as the Three Musketeers.
Okay.
Carrie
Yeah.
Perry, myself, and Wilbur Smith.
Okay.
Because we got involved in an organization called NECAP, which was a North End Community Action Program in North Hartford.
Okay.
Because what happened, Wilbur Smith, Carrie, and I, and several others got on a bus from Mount Olive Baptist Church and went south to Albany, Georgia,
Right.
to get in the civil rights struggle with Dr. King. We arrived there when Dr. King got out of jail that night, and we demonstrated. Only to come back to find out we're having the same things. There were no blacks above cleaning and maintenance and elevator operators in
Right.
our insurance companies, in our department stores, and the same bus that was donated to us from the insurance company would not hire blacks above porters. So we decided to do some demonstrating right here in Hartford, along with the Reverend Richard Battles, who was
Right.
at Mount Olive Baptist Church and was actually one of Dr. King's so-called lieutenants.
Uh-huh.
So that was our
Indoctrination, if you will.
into politics,
right.
civil
Okay.
rights.
Okay.
And there's very close connection to the two, particularly to the black community.
Fantastic stuff. We're going to take a break right here, give you a chance to catch your breath, give me a
Okay.
chance to think more about what's happening now and how that parallels what took
To what's
place
been
then.
before.
Thank you so much again for that, that brief moment in history, if you will, that sort of capsulizes what took place then and how it actually impacts us even now.
Thank
We'll be right back with the Honorable Thurman Milner. Give us a few minutes and we'll be right back. This week's challenge, we're with the Honorable Thurman Milner, the first black African-American mayor of a major city in New England, talking a little bit about Hartford politics, about local politics, grassroots politics, if you will. All politics are local, Thurman, and it would seem to me that most people by now would start to try to understand that what happens at the local level simply rises to the state and national level. And we were talking about the civil rights movement and your activism and how, you were sort of thrusted into, being more active and more a part of making change in the political arena. And now we've just finished a race for senator in which three African American men were vying for that seat. And it's the same seat, I believe, that was held by in the past by Senator Wilbur Smith and Senator Barrows and those folks. Now being the center of attention, if you will, in the political arena for our community. It is a much coveted seat, but I noticed in the last segment you talked about how Wilbur, has specific goals, has specific objectives, and he had targeted things because of his activism that he was going after and seeking change for. What's your take now on what you see now for those who are vying for that coveted seat?
Okay, number one, it's amazing because when Wilbur got sick,
right,
I ran, and he asked me to run for that seat because he was going to run to that seat again, and he got sick and passed on, and I ran, and Eric Coleman took over the seat when I left office.
Right,
that was 20 years ago.
Yeah,
and it was very amazing.
Yeah.
Well, see, my whole thing with politics is a little different than a lot of people. I don't believe politics should not be a career. You should go in and do what you can do.
Right.
Move on and get out.
Right.
It
becomes a career after how many years?
Yeah,
10 years.
I think 3 or 4 terms. You get in and do what you can do.
Right.
You make the changes, and you set your goals of what you want to do.
3 or 4 terms. What are they? 4-year terms as senator. 4 years. 4 years is a term. So 3 terms would be 12 years.
Yeah. Well, that's it's. That's my opinion,
Sure.
I
think there should be term limits too, by the way.
Yeah, I don't have anything against those.
Yeah,
I don't have anything against those that run forever and ever. But that's my personal opinion.
Sure.
I just feel that's what you should do.
Sure.
Because people come up with new ideas.
Absolutely.
Younger people coming out that need to get in and make some changes.
Absolutely.
And when you look at our district and the district that we recently went through in election, we have some of the most serious problems as many major cities have.
Yeah.
And our elected officials have to really begin to check those problems out.
Absolutely.
I'm finally glad to see that the governor.
Education.
Yeah, the governor's finally, that's what I'm
right.
getting ready to say, he's finally targeted the schools that need assistance the most.
Right.
And that's something that was neglected for years and years and years. And, without education,
right.
Your economic empowerment is not going to happen.
Right.
And that's where it has to begin.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I think that they actually at this point, I'm not sure of the priority of one versus the other because our areas are so impoverished.
Oh yeah.
The people are so poor and desperate that the interest in education or the desire for education lags behind their instincts for survival, it would seem. And it seems to me that they both ought to almost be on even par. If you're talking about educating a community or providing a better quality of life for a community, you gotta help them understand the economics and the need for addressing the economics within those communities too. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, because first of all, if you don't begin it in the elementary schools,
right?
By the time a youngster grows up, if he doesn't get it, he's not going to be interested in further education when he gets into high school and thinking about moving on into college.
Right.
Then
they won't even know what's possible.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You really have to come from, the basics.
Right.
It begins at home.
Yes, it does.
Then it moves into.
Yes, it does.
Into the schools and in the colleges.
In general population.
And the other problem we have is our young people getting out of prison.
Right.
Unfortunately, society condemns them. How can you expect a young man that gets out of prison to do something and he can't find a job? No one will hire him. No one.
Right.
You will say, questions.
Because he's made one mistake.
Yeah, the question asked, well, why he shouldn't have made that mistake, but he did. He made changes.
Right.
I take for example someone like Michael Sharp,
sure.
who years and years ago made some mistakes, turned his life around,
right.
came back to Hartford,
right.
did a tremendous job with Jamoke Academy.
Absolutely.
Then they dug back into his education.
And they condemned him again.
If he could do what he did without a doctorate,
right,
and make the changes he made and turn his whole life around,
right,
then I applaud him for that.
I do as well. You know, I
it's
do
unfortunate
as well.
that you know they had these type of covers,
right.
But you know, it looked like they. If you look, I wonder how many other people don't
right.
have doctorates.
Right.
It's like next thing they did, they went to New London.
Yeah.
Another African American
right.
who was thinking to be a top educator.
Right.
And had the qualifications, but he didn't have his doctorate at the time.
Sure.
But you know, how far? Then that investigation stopped.
Right.
But you know, one thing we got to understand and learn that, you know, we can't do like other folks have done in the past because we're always in the spotlight.
Yeah.
You know, when I became elected mayor, I knew that I had to sort of walk on eggs.
Sure.
It's very important because I know, you know, particularly for the younger people in Hartford, because they were looking at me.
Right.
And if I did something wrong,
right.
It was amazing because I was the first person to have a school named after him while they're still alive.
Yeah, that's true.
And I sort of laughed at it, but I told my relatives I just have to behave myself for the rest of my life because, you know, it's true because, you know, the kids, even the community,
absolutely.
Look at me, oh, that's your school. It's not my school. It belongs to Harvard Board of Education.
Right.
But, you know, and the reason, Thelma Dickinson, who was chairman of the Hartford Board of Education,
right.
she came to me and she told me she didn't want to name the school because of me.
Right.
They were getting ready to tear that school down. And she said, to save the school, if we name it after you, they're not going to tear it down. Secondly, if we name it after you, hopefully it'll inspire some youngsters who come into school to do better. It was only on that case because the school the roof was leaking,
right.
had asbestos,
yes,
lead paint at that time.
Right.
It had no elevator, and the auditorium, it was a mess at that time.
Yeah.
But I went to my family, we talked about it, we said, yes, and they did save it, they did change it.
Yeah.
And for 20 years, it basically went through
neglect.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden, Jamoki comes in, and in 3 years, they actually turned it around.
Yeah.
And as soon as they turn it around, the Hartford Courant starts an attack on Mike Sharp.
Yeah.
They pulled Jamoki out.
Right.
But they kept all Jamoki staff in there.
Yeah.
And the Jamoki staff is still in there.
Yeah.
But I'm glad to see the school is making a change. But that's what we need to understand. All these things come through struggle.
Yeah.
And our young people need to understand that life isn't just something that's given to them. It came through a struggle. They're not where they are today because this is the way it was.
Right.
But their parents are not teaching them that.
Yeah.
You know, no one talks about those things.
Yeah. You know what? I can't help but think, you know, when it comes to education, it seems to me that in our community, you know, we've sort of, you know, set that aside to some degree. You know, it's startling the literacy or illiteracy that exists within our communities because, you know, I remember there was a time when getting your education was the priority for black families,
right,
and African American families. And for some reason now it seems to you know, it seems to be a you know, sort of a side conversation now. It doesn't seem to mean as much. Are you getting the same reading?
Yeah, well, what happens is, you know, our young people are getting this get rich quick attitude, and you know, this whole drug trade that wasn't in existence when we were much younger. They don't understand that, you know, slaves were actually killed for teaching their children to read, and things like that happened, and what it took for them to even to get an education, and they don't really understand the necessity. And even today, to get in New York City, and where I worked for years, you know, even garbage collectors, in order to be a garbage collector, you have to be a high school graduate. It's not because, you know, you need an education to collect garbage, but, you know, they know if you went to school and stayed that long, you would stay on the job. And if that's what they're asking for garbage collectors, you imagine what they're asking for these higher positions. You know, we're moving up in a high-tech society. And if you don't have the education, you're going to fail. You know, I was sort of upset, like at Weaver High School, doing culinary arts at Weaver High School. Most of our folks know how to cook. You know, let that take place in some other schools. Teach our kids high tech, so they can be prepared to go to college.
Engineering, you know, those kinds of things.
And the problem is that many of our parents now are youngsters who dropped out of school, and so they're not teaching their kids because they didn't learn. I look at Milner School. A lot of parents coming in there now were students when the school was first named 25 years ago.
Right, right.
And a lot of them were dropouts.
Right.
And so their kids don't come in with the two educated parents. They
Right.
come from single parent household where the mother's working all day and they don't do homework. But that's beginning to change because there are groups like, Christian charities and other groups and organizations that are getting involved in tutoring and helping, and even ex-offender organizations are beginning to do education, do GEDs.
And that, takes me back to, as a political person, if you will, targeting and trying to meet certain objectives. And I can remember very distinctly how it was necessary to get corporate America, to get those folks, who were responsible for the economies, involved in creating the talent pool that was necessary to handle certain jobs. And now it doesn't seem to be as much of an interest in the urban areas to get those kids and get those families involved in those industries that are prolific and that are coming up, so that they can actually participate in those up and coming industries and actually contribute to them. I don't see as much of that, and I don't actually, quite frankly, where we're at, I don't see almost any of it.
No, because you don't even hear about education during election time anymore.
Right.
You don't hear about the needs for education and educating our people and getting them involved. And that's, to me, is a serious problem because the leaders are the ones they look up to.
Right.
And if you don't begin to address these issues and you don't begin to get our corporations involved in these issues, then it's a major problem.
Yeah.
Because our kids see the elected officials running for office. And, and they're not talking about education.
Right.
They're talking about pie in the sky.
Yeah.
There's no pie in the sky if you're not educated.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
And I've always viewed it as kind of a three-legged stool. I mean, politics serves a purpose. But obviously you have to have education. But then at some point you got to take that into industry. It's got to be applied somewhere. You've got to somehow figure out where those vocations are best applied so you can get the best, quality of participant or human being, involved in that process. And I just don't see, where, even people now who are involved in politics are more interested, it seems to me, Mayor, in the privilege and in the opportunity to sit in that seat, but they're real short in terms of ideas and specifically in terms of goals and objectives.
Yeah, ideas and responsibilities. They don't, that's that's the thing about when you're elected, you have a responsibility to the people that put you in office.
Yeah.
You're in there to actually assist and make life better for them. That's why you're elected. And
Well, where's the planning at? I don't, maybe you've heard, but I haven't heard, what's the plan? You want the seat, you want the opportunity, but what is it that you hope to accomplish, given the opportunity?
And it's amazing, even those that are elected and been in office, you hear them talking about I did this, but most of that stuff is stuff that is just the Democratic, comes from the governor's office or something else, and they just voted for it.
Yeah, and you're a part of a plan somebody else has already is implemented.
And you voted, and you came out of your committee and haven't served in the legislature. I know the process, but what have you done as an individual to improve your community?
I'll never forget this, and it's probably the note that we'll wind the show up on. But I'll never forget this: when you were back in the House, you talked about authoring and co-authoring legislation. And I hadn't heard any of the statesmen that come from our area talk about that until I heard you say it.
Well, that's important. That's what you go in there for.
That's right.
You don't go in there to sign off on somebody else's bills.
That's right.
You go in there to make a difference.
That's
and what I did and what I made a point to do is listen to people.
Right.
And they would come to me with their problems. And I grew up in a family on welfare because my father was in the hospital and died at a young age. So my mother was single. We had 7 members of our family. So I knew what the welfare situation was.
Sure.
And at that time, the state was talking about workfare. In other words, making people on welfare work to get the welfare checks.
Yeah.
But my whole thing, you put them to work, give them a job.
Right.
Why keep them on welfare and give them?
And
so
continue to give
we
them
decided
welfare,
to
right.
get, work on legislation for that. People talked at that time about the energy situation. We have that problem now. So my thing was, don't talk about it. Introduce legislations to fight it. We're not doing that no more. We're not being innovative. Big talk now is on a stadium downtown.
Yeah, really.
But the community is hurting. Those are part-time jobs.
Yeah.
Those are not going to college to become professors and doctors and lawyers and things of that sort.
Yeah.
The stadium is nice. It's a nice thing to have.
Right.
But that's some nice thing to have.
Right.
But what about our children being educated?
Long term.
And
What about-
long-term
yeah.
process that can take place.
Yeah. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here this morning. We could obviously spend
Talk for hours.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you to come back. We've
Okay.
only had a brief time, and this time I promise I'll give you much more prior notice so that I'm not interrupting your schedule.
No, I was more than glad when you called me to be able to come.
It's an honor to have you. It's a truly an honor and a privilege to have you. The Honorable Thurman Milner on the challenge this morning, obviously still a part of the struggle. It has been indeed a pleasure to have his voice. Thank you for tuning in to the challenge, and remember, be blessed.